Thank you so much for joining us today for our Building High Integrity NGSS Assessments with InnerOrbit webinar. So my name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her, and I was a high school chemistry teacher for 10 years. I taught in our alternative learning program. I taught regular chem. I taught honors chem. So I had a lot of opportunities to teach kids in a lot of different ways with a lot of different strategies. During that time, I was an NGSS pioneer and advocate in my science department. So I was all about trying to bring in the sense making and the three dimensions into our department and into that classroom. And I also had the pleasure of being a PLC lead. So I got to lead a lot of data-driven dialogue, which is my favorite. And now I have the absolute joy of partnering with districts to help them implement InnerOrbit. And a fun fact about me, I have never watched The Office. I've tried a couple times. It's just never hooked me. And now I feel like it's almost just too late, to the chagrin of many people in my life, including Julia. Would you please introduce yourself?
I think it's never too late for The Office. I don't know what you're talking about, but okay. My name is, I'm glad to introduce myself too. My name is Julia Mota. I was a teacher and a tutor for elementary students in the Dominican Republic, and I've been supporting teachers and districts with their NGSS implementation for the last almost 4 years now, actually. It says 3 years, but it's been almost 4. And I'm happy to partner and provide guidance to schools and districts implementing assessment within their NGSS instruction with InnerOrbit specifically. And my fun fact is that I can't believe that Emily has not watched The Office. I mean, I saw this when we were preparing the slides, and I'm like, I don't understand it, Emily, but okay. Now, onto our agenda. I'm going to quickly explain what we're going to go over today. And our goal for the afternoon is to define what a high integrity assessment looks like and show you how educators can use InnerOrbit to build these assessments. We're going to be here for about 30 minutes and we're going to start defining sense making. Emily's going to talk to us a little bit about the 3 dimensions and then about sense making versus representation. Then I'm going to go over sense making and phenomena with Achieve's task annotation project in science. Then Emily's going to talk to us a little bit about InnerOrbit and how it works, how we scaffold our questions, phenomena, questions, alignment guides, and data. And then we're going to wrap it up for the day. So let's do this, as Dwight would say, right? Okay. Now passing it on to Emily to start defining sense making.
All right. Thank you, Julia. So I wanted to just kind of start off this webinar with just kind of going all the way back to really the core of what the NGSS is. So the NGSS stands for the Next Generation Science Standards and is what InnerOrbit assessments are based off of. And it's what a lot of new state science standards are based off of, which is why we're here. So when you're looking at the Next Generation Science Standards, they are at their core science standards. So for example, I've got a standard here, HSPS 11, that stands for high school HS. PS stands for physical science. And this is the Physical Science Standard 1.1, which reads, use the periodic table as a model to predict the relative properties of elements based on the patterns of electrons in the outermost energy level of atoms. So if that went a little over your head, that's all right. What I wanted to talk about was how there are 3 primary elements of every single NGSS standard. The first of which is the disciplinary core idea. This is the content of the standard. In this case, it's knowing how atoms are structured and specifically how the electrons are structured and how that then affects the property of the elements. So this is just science content and information that we have deemed science students should know about science. Also, every single NGSS standard is going to have a science and engineering practice to it. And this has been kind of one of those big shifts we've seen in science education, that we're really trying to incorporate something for students to do with every single standard. So in this particular standard, the science and engineering practice is developing and using models. So students will actually have to use a model to predict the relationships between systems or components of a system. And every single standard is going to have some element of this within it. And it's also going to have a cross-cutting concept element into it as well. And the cross-cutting concept you can kind of think of as like these overarching patterns that occur in science regardless of the grade level, regardless of the content. And it's kind of like the lens in which we view the science that we're looking at. In this case, our cross-cutting concept is patterns. Patterns occur everywhere within science. And so students are going to be using that lens of patterns in order to use a model to predict the properties of atoms due to their electrons within the orbit of the atom. So now that we've talked a little bit about the three dimensions of the NGSS and how they come together in order to make a standard, what I wanted to talk about now is how this comes together with this idea of sense making. So sense making is this idea that we want students to be able to take their DCIs, their core content knowledge, take their SEPs, what they can physically do and manipulate in science, and take their cross-cutting concepts, their lens in which they try to view these things in science, and we want them to make sense of something. Because really, ultimately, our goal as science educators is we want to be able to send our students off into the world and to be able to use the skills and knowledge that we've taught them to make sense of the world around them. They're not necessarily going to see the exact situations and scenarios that we've painted for them in our classroom, but we want them to apply what they've learned to any new situation or scenario they may encounter. And that's what this idea of sense making is. We want students to take what they've gathered and centered around some sort of phenomena or some sort of problem. And this is this big shift that we've seen in science education and what we here at InnerOrbit are trying to help facilitate. So in order to bring this back to assessments, right? Because that's what we're here today, how to build high integrity assessments using InnerOrbit. I wanted to show you an example of two different assessment questions. The first, based on the table, the periodic table, if you will, which of these elements probably has physical and chemical properties most similar to boron? The answer is aluminum. The second question I wanted to show you all is this. Predict another element that could be used in welding arcs similarly to argon. Identify what properties are similar and how patterns in the periodic table can be used to justify your response. Now, both of these questions are assessing students being able to understand properties within the periodic table due to electrons orbiting the nucleus. With that in mind, what I want to ask you all, and if you wouldn't mind answering in the chat, what is the key difference that y'all notice between these two different questions? And bonus points, why is that difference important for our instruction and assessment practices? So looking at these two questions that are assessing the same knowledge, what are some of the key differences between them, and why is this difference important for instruction and assessment practice? I'll go ahead and give you all a minute to answer in the chat, and we'll go ahead and discuss from there. All right, so number 2 seems a lot more involved, needs a lot more thinking. Absolutely. Multiple choice, they could just get a lucky guess. The other one is asking them to make a prediction, identify properties, clearer picture. Beautiful. Yes. Question 1 is only 1D. Question 2 is 3. Beautiful. Y'all are nailing it here. So this very first question is what we would call a one-dimensional question. Really, when we're looking at this question, this is probably something students have looked at or seen before. So for example, when I was a chemistry teacher in the classroom, I would have the periodic table up there, and I would be referencing the periodic table consistently and talking about families within the periodic table and elements that behave the same. So showing them something like this, they've probably seen it before. And because of that, we're not asking them to make sense of something new. The other main part of this, as a lot of people pointed out, is this is a one-dimensional question, meaning we're only assessing them on the DCI component of the standard, so the content knowledge. The other thing here, as some people also noticed, is this could really just be a memorizing thing. If students memorize that elements that are in the same group going up and down have the same properties, we're not really asking them to remember why or justify why or get behind what's actually going on here. So one-dimensional questions, while they can be necessary, while they can be helpful, they are not a true measure of sense making and not a true measure of mastery. Where when we're looking at that second question, so predict another element that could be used in welding arcs similarly to argon, what we have here is, unless y'all are talking about welding with metals all the time, this could potentially be a phenomenon that they have not seen before. So they haven't applied their understanding to this. And in this case, we are leveraging those other two parts of the standard, the science and engineering practice and the cross-cutting concept. So in this case, we're asking them to look at this model of the welding arc, look at these models of the different atoms, and we're asking them to think through that lens of patterns. What patterns are they noticing within this model? And using the patterns and using the model in order to explain their thinking of the similar properties of elements. In this case, we're really having them make sense of something new. And now Julia is going to talk to us a little bit more about how phenomena plays such an important role when it comes to actually trying to make sense with the NGSS.
Well, thank you, Emily. And yes, sense making is central in the NGSS. So we want to understand really how to get students from that representation that we just saw to these performances that actually have them making sense of these novel scenarios. Now, sense making is a central concept in the NGSS, and it's really crucial for us to understand how it transforms science learning. And according to this article by Wested's Task Annotation Project for Science, and I'm going to read this here. So sense making occurs when students connect their previously developed ideas, abilities, and experiences together to address the uncertainty presented by the phenomenon, to figure out why the phenomenon occurs, to propose possible mechanisms or solutions, to ask further probing questions, etc. So the integration of phenomena in our teaching encourages students to think and work like scientists. And they're not just passive recipients of information, but active participants in the learning process. And that's what we're trying to do, for them to connect their knowledge, engage with uncertainty, and also propose explanations and ask further questions, all of which contribute to a deeper and more meaningful understanding of science at the end of the day. So let's look and let's consider really, as we continue exploring how to implement sense making in our classrooms, let's see how we assess our students' understanding and how we can effectively do this. Now, when we talk about what assessments should look less like, the first thing that we need to come up with is that representing exactly what they've already learned and experienced in the classroom is not enough. Even though this can show whether students remember facts, it doesn't really demonstrate their deeper understanding or their ability to apply the knowledge, which is what we're trying to do here. Then also explaining a phenomena or addressing a problem that students fully understand. If students already fully understand it, the assessment may not challenge them to think critically or creatively. So it's important to push their boundaries and present them with novel situations. And also providing just a factually correct or incorrect answer, like we saw on the DCI only question about aluminum. These assessments focus only on right or wrong answers can miss the nuance of students' thought processes. So understanding how students arrive at an answer is as important as the answer itself. Now, thinking about what assessments should look more like, again, asking students to connect what they have already learned and experienced in a new way. So effective assessments ask students to integrate their prior knowledge and experience into novel contexts. And this also shows their ability to apply what they have learned in different situations, demonstrating even deeper comprehension. Then also connecting their learning to a phenomenon or problem that involves authentic uncertainty from the student's perspective, because this challenges them to explore, ask questions, and even develop explanations based on their understanding. And then finally, making their thinking visible, as we said before. The goal is to make students' thought processes transparent, and this includes their evidence-based reasoning, and this also can be achieved through various formats such as models, explanations, arguments, investigation plans, questions, and predictions. So by designing assessments that align with these principles that we just saw, we create opportunities for students to demonstrate their mastery in a meaningful way. And they are not just repeating what they learned, but they're actively engaging with the material, applying it, and showing their understanding through various forms of expression. Now, going into a specific example, going back to our example, which criteria do you think this phenomenon needs? Definitely is an item that focuses on representation rather than sense making, as we stated before. So again, this meets all the criteria on what assessments should look less like when we look at it. Now, moving to the next assessment item, this one, and spoiler alert, we've already talked about this one. In this case, students are really engaging in sense making because they need to connect what they have already learned and experienced in a new way by applying their understanding of the periodic table and chemical properties in a novel context. And they must use their knowledge of the periodic table's patterns and the specific properties of argon to make an informed prediction. Again, with authentic uncertainty, the same thing. This question is presenting a real-world problem, selecting an appropriate element, in this case for welding arcs, that students haven't encountered exactly in this way before. Maybe we haven't talked about this at all in the classroom. And sometimes they'll be like, but we never talked about this in class. Yes, that's true. And that's the whole point, right? And also making their thinking visible. Students here are required to explain their reasoning, detailing which properties of argon are important for its use in welding and identifying another element with similar properties. So they need to support their prediction. And this process, again, makes their thinking and evidence-based reasoning visible through their explanations. All right, and now I'll pass it over to Emily to talk a little bit about what is InnerOrbit.
Thank you, Julia. So now that we've taken some time to kind of talk about what a high integrity assessment is, which is essentially giving students that opportunity for sense making, being able to have them leverage what they've learned with the DCIs, the SEPs, and the CCCs, and having them leverage all of that within a new phenomena or problem. That is really what we're looking for with these high integrity assessments. And we want to show you how you are able to do that easily with InnerOrbit. So the first thing that InnerOrbit does is we have tons of phenomena, over 1,000 phenomena to be exact. And all of our assessment items on our site are actually going to be linked to this phenomena. So every time students are being asked a question, we are asking them to apply it to something new, which is really giving them that opportunity for sense making every single time. And if you were curious, we have questions and phenomena that scale all the way from third grade all the way up until 12th grade or different high school content areas or curricula. So we scale what we're asking our students to make sense of at an age appropriate level. So they're consistently having that opportunity to try to figure out the world around them. And then the other thing that InnerOrbit is questions. And I'm going to do a deeper dive into our question structure here in just a moment. But I did want to highlight the fact that we have over 10,000 different assessment items. So as you are probably aware, we know that giving students multiple times to show what they've learned is not only beneficial for them in order to have multiple opportunities to practice what they're learning, but it also is beneficial to us as educators to have multiple points in order to measure their growth and where they're going. So with having over 10,000 assessment items at your disposal, you have so many opportunities to assess your students, whether it's in a more diagnostic or formative practice way, or in that summative mastery point that we want to reach at the end. And this is where I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we write our questions and how we ensure that they are in fact three-dimensional, and maybe more importantly even, talk about how we can scaffold students to be able to answer a three-dimensional question. So we know that three-dimensional sense making is the goal. We want students to be able to use their knowledge, like the DCI, the content, through the lens of the cross-cutting concept and the science and engineering practice to explain why or how. So how do we get them there? If any of you were looking at that argon, like chemistry example, and you were going, I have no idea if my kids would be able to answer that, that's fair. This is one, a big shift in science education. And two, it's a big lift that we're asking our students to do in order to bring all of these different components together into one question. So rather than just throwing them in the deep end, what we've tried to do here at InnerOrbit is find a way to bridge students from this DCI only representation to this three-dimensional sense making. And the way that we try to do this is by offering students different types of questions. So we already talked a little bit about a one-dimensional question. So a one-dimensional question is just content. And I want to be really clear here that we here at InnerOrbit do not think that one-dimensional questions don't serve a purpose in education. It is important to know if students know the content that we're teaching them. What we're trying to say is that is not a true measurement of mastery. So at the end of the day, if we want to know if they've mastered this NGSS standard, the DCI, the one-dimensional questions, are not the only way to go. But in order to help our students get to that three-dimensional understanding, what we can do is ask our students two-dimensional questions. So this is where they're still looking at the DCI, they're still looking at the content, but we are layering in just one other element of the NGSS at a time. So can they use the content with the science and engineering practice? So can we just analyze and interpret data with plate tectonics? Or can we look at plate tectonics with patterns, just focusing on one at a time? And then we can give them three-dimensional questions where we're bringing all of this together at once. So not only do these two-dimensional questions give your students a chance to practice and master these different elements of the standard one at a time, but the way that our data reports work out is you can actually figure out which part of the standard students need more support with as well. And I'll show you a little bit more of that here in a sec. So what I wanted to show you here was the different types of questions that we offer here on InnerOrbit. So what we did here is we pulled just one of our 1,000 phenomena, which is the sea star reproducing, repairing, or ripping apart? So what we're showing here is we've got this sea star, and sea stars are fascinating animals, if you did not know. If they get injured or in danger, they can undergo an asexual process called fragmentation. This means they can split their body into two parts, with each part eventually growing into a new sea star. The image below illustrates the process. So what we've got here is we've got this phenomena, this understanding of sea stars, and then we've got this model that a student made also explaining a sea star. And then what we can do from here is show you our different question types. Now, the first question I'm showing you is this is the ultimate goal, all right, which is our sense-making 3D question, where students are going to be using the SCP, developing and using models, using the DCI of inheritance of traits and variation of traits, and using this cross-cutting concept of cause and effect. This is eventually what we want our students to be able to do. But rather than just throwing this at them, what we've done here at InnerOrbit is we've offered some scaffolded questions along the way, starting with those one-dimensional questions. It's important to make sure that our students actually understand what asexual reproduction is versus sexual reproduction before we ask them to layer all of those different elements of the standard on top of one another. So InnerOrbit does offer these one-dimensional questions to ensure that your students do have that primary content down that you're trying to teach them. And then from there is where we start to add in our two-dimensional questions. So this is an example of a two-dimensional question where we're asking students to we've got to use that content as far as like reproduction goes, but now we're trying to layer in that element of cause and effect. In this case, students are just practicing, again, still the content, but the CCC. So we can really get them to focus in and hone in on that one element of being able to look at cause and effect. We also offer two-dimensional questions where students are then just looking at the SCP all at once. So in this case, can students still look at this idea of reproduction, but now can we look at it through the models? So looking at that student model and seeing if we can answer a question using just the model. And again, what's nice here, which I'll show you in a second, is our data actually can break down which part of these questions students tend to struggle with more. And then, like I showed you at the beginning, we still offer our three-dimensional questions, which is having our students putting it all together. So what we've tried to do here is we want you to be able to build these high integrity assessments where students have this novel phenomena and we're having them truly make sense of it with all three dimensions of the NGSS. We also know here at InnerOrbit that that is a big ask for students to do. And so this is why we've created this pathway of different question types in order to help bridge that gap to get our students to this point. So making sure they understand the fundamental content at first, then layering in different dimensions of the standard at one point, and then finally bringing it all together into that three-dimensional sense making with that novel phenomena to make sure that we are truly seeing if our students have mastered the topic. Somebody mentioned this here in the chat. One of the things that we have offered here as well with InnerOrbit to help you build these high integrity assessments is these alignment guides. So there are a lot of curriculum out there that is aligned to the NGSS and InnerOrbit pairs really well with. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to take some of the load off in terms of trying to build these high integrity assessments. So what we've done is we've looked at these units within these different curriculum. So for example, this is the 7th grade Open SciEd curriculum, and we've looked at the different units and we've written down the different standards that are assessed within that unit. And what we've done is we've actually linked different assessments for those standards. So we have pre-made formative assessments and pre-made summative assessments. So if you're in a pinch with time and you know that you need to give a summative on 7.1, you can go ahead and click that link and you have a high integrity assessment already built, ready for you to go. Or if you want a little bit more autonomy with the assessments that you're building, you can click that See All button, and then you can see all the different questions that align to that standard, and then you can build your own from there. You can also build assessments from multiple standards. So if you're doing like a big end of unit assessment for 7.3, you can pull some from each of those different standards into a big end of unit summative as well, right? We like to think so. And now this is the part of InnerOrbit that I like geek out over and that I wish I had when I was in the classroom. One of the big things that we do is, since we offer these different question types, we offer these one-dimensional questions, these two-dimensional, these three-dimensional, because we tag the questions with what dimension of the NGSS it's assessing, we can then pull this data to see exactly what parts of the NGSS our students are struggling with. Because when you look at those big three-dimensional questions, there's a lot of ways that could go wrong. And rather than going back to your PLC being like, all right, well, they all bombed question 10, now what? Now you can sit there and say, okay, well, what was question 10 assessing? Maybe it was assessing motion and stability. Okay, so I don't think it's the fact that they don't know forces. Maybe we don't need to review forces. And it was about cause and effect. Really, cause and effect doesn't seem to be the issue either because they're doing fine. Oh, maybe it's the modeling part. Maybe we really need to do some more work with models. And that's the part of the question that our students struggled with. From there, even, you can get even more detailed data. So for example, if developing and using models was our issue, we can look and see what grade level band was particularly struggling with developing and using models. And not only that, we can see exactly what part of developing and using models was a struggle. Was it the fact that they had to describe or predict phenomena? Or was it because they were using the model as an analogy or an example of an abstract representation? You can really get down to the nitty-gritty of what you need to help support them with. And this isn't just for one of the SEPs, you can do it with many. And for example, with planning and carrying out investigations, maybe you've assessed them in the elementary grade level band and the middle school grade level band. And so you can see within here, maybe you need to even go back to an earlier grade level band and offer more support there before moving on to the current grade level band in which students are at. So with all this data, you have so many opportunities to, again, assess with our questions, but then truly understand what support students need and actually make those data-informed instructions moving forward. And not only do we have the detailed data on that end, but you can zoom our data out and actually see how things are going on a district-wide level as well. So if you are a district admin or supporting multiple school sites, you can pull up all of your school sites and pull up, for example, all of the SEPs and see if there are any patterns or trends within the entire district. Maybe everybody needs some help with developing and using models, and you can lead a district-wide PD. But maybe I'm going to go ask School 4 what they're doing and see if they have any amazing activities they want to share out during this PD. So you can leverage the strengths that you're noticing and the opportunity areas that you're noticing in order to serve everybody on a larger wide level if needed. So that's a little bit more about what is a high integrity assessment, and then how you can utilize InnerOrbit to actually build them. And Julia's going to go ahead and wrap us up here.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you so much for being here. We are really excited maybe to talk to you, to explore how we could help and support your science team. So, and thank you so much for bearing with us through this outage. If you had trouble logging into Zoom and you kept trying, well, thank you. And thank you for being here. So I'm going to, just to recap what we've learned in this webinar, InnerOrbit can be used to build high integrity assessments due to its use to novel phenomena and three-dimensional questions. So if you're wanting to build a high integrity assessment for the next year, InnerOrbit can be a really good tool to help you do that. And now through the use of InnerOrbit's 3D reports, educators can then make data-informed decisions to make impactful instructional shifts. So if there are things that you need to analyze or even professional development opportunities within your district that you would like to understand, then these data reports are a great way to start. Now, for some next steps, if you're interested in learning how InnerOrbit could help or support your science team, I'm going to drop an interest form in the chat. Feel free to drop your information there and we will be in touch with you soon. And then I'm also gonna drop in the chat a sense-making guide. So the sense-making portion of this webinar was part of another webinar that we hosted a while ago, and we have a facilitator guide. So in case you are looking to create any PD for this summer, I'm going to drop this link in the chat. And if this is helpful for you and some of these slides are helpful for you for sense making for your teachers, then this is a resource that you could use. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you like our content. We will always be uploading things and uploading this kind of. If you want to follow up with us, feel free to check us out there. And you can always email us if you have any feedback, inquiries@innerorbit.com. And thank you everyone so much for being here.